Okay, so we're diving into leaf sorting today, a job that honestly I pictured as like dusty factories and mountains of leaves before I saw these sources you sent over.
Right. Not exactly glamorous at first glance, huh?
Not at all. But now I'm kind of fascinated.
Yeah, it's way more than meets the eye.
I mean, I always knew someone had to sort the tobacco leaves for cigars, but this guide makes it sound like an art form. Like, they talk about leaf sorters specializing in selecting leaves for the wrapper, the binder, the filler. I don't even know there were different types of leaves for that.
Oh, absolutely. It's like you wouldn't use the same grapes for juice that you'd use for a fine wine, right? Each part of the cigar needs a specific kind of leaf to get the flavor and the burn just right.
That's so interesting. So it's not just about picking out the good leaves from the bad.
Nope, not even close. It takes real skill to be a leaf sorter, knowing what to look for in terms of color, texture, even the grain of the leaf.
So, like, what kind of things are we talking about here? What makes a good leaf versus a bad leaf?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the region the tobacco comes from, the soil, the climate, all that. And then there's the curing process, how the leaves are dried and fermented. That has a huge impact on the flavor, too.
Wow, it really is like winemaking. And I'm guessing that's where the specialization comes in?
Exactly. A leaf sorter who specializes in wrappers, for example, they're looking for those picture-perfect leaves, the ones with a smooth texture, consistent color, no blemishes.
Because that's the part you see, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about that first impression, that luxurious feel. While a binder leaf, that's more about strength and elasticity, making sure the cigar burns evenly.
This is blowing my mind. I have no idea there was so much to it.
And we haven't even touched on the sensory aspect yet. A trained leaf sorter, they use their sight, smell, and even hearing to determine a leaf's quality.
Wait, hold up. Hearing, you're messing with me, right? What are they listening for, a symphony of leaves or something?
Not quite a symphony, but close. A properly dried tobacco leaf, it has a certain rustle to it. And any deviation from that sound could be a sign of mold, mildew, things like that.
No way. They can hear that.
Oh, yeah. They're like the ultimate listeners, picking up on those subtle cues that most people would totally miss.
Okay, you definitely have my attention. This is way more nuanced than I ever imagined. But I gotta ask, going back to those specialized roles for a sec, what exactly is the difference between a wrapper, binder, and filler leaf? I mean, I get that they're different, but how?
Think of it like building a house, okay?
Okay.
The filler leaves, those are your foundation. They provide the bulk of the cigar's flavor, the aroma, all that good stuff.
Right, makes sense.
Then you've got your binder leaves. Those are like the walls holding everything together,
Wow.
making sure it burns nice and evenly.
Okay, I'm with you.
And finally, the wrapper leaf, that's your curb appeal. It's the first thing you see, so it's got to be visually appealing, but it also plays a huge role in the overall taste of the cigar.
Wow, so even within the world of leaf sorting, there's all this room for specialization and expertise. It's not just one job title, it's a whole career path.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another point, the potential career trajectory for a leaf sorter. This guide mentions opportunities that go way beyond just the sorting table, things like training new recruits, overseeing quality control, even moving into management.
Really? So you're telling me there's room to grow in this field? That's not something you hear about every day.
And think about the skills you're developing along the way. That sharp eye for detail, the ability to make quick decisions based on really subtle cues, those are transferable skills, valuable in a ton of industries.
That's a really good point. I never thought about it like that. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about actually getting that first leaf sorter job. Luckily, this RoleCatcher guide we have goes into the hiring process, even includes some common interview questions.
And honestly, those questions are pretty insightful. They give you a real feel for what employers are looking for in a leaf sorter.
Ooh, okay, spill the tea. What kind of questions are we talking about?
Well, forget those generic tell me about yourself questions.
Hmm.
They're asking things like, can you describe a time you had to make a tough decision with, like, no information to go on? Or how would you handle it if you found a quality control issue in, like, a huge batch of tobacco?
Oh, wow. So they're not messing around. They want critical thinkers, people who can work on their own and make judgment calls under pressure.
Exactly. They're looking for someone who doesn't just have a good eye, but a good head on their shoulders, too.
This is fascinating. I have to say, my whole image of leaf sorting has done a complete 180.
And we're just getting started. We've talked about the different roles, the skills, even touched on the interview process. But there's a whole lot more to uncover about this world. You know, thinking about all this, it reminds me, we haven't even talked about the actual work environment.
Oh, right. It's not all like pristine labs and fancy offices, is it?
Not exactly. This Cigar Aficionado article we have, it has this great day in the life piece, and one leaf sorter talks about spending hours in this, like, sweltering warehouse surrounded by these mountains of tobacco.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's just one scenario. The RoleCatcher guide, it mentions that some leaf sorters actually work out in the fields, like hand-selecting leaves during harvest time. Talk about getting your hands dirty.
No kidding. Sun, dirt, bugs, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. It's definitely not a desk job.
But you know what's interesting? That same article, they talk about how these leaf sorters, even the ones working in those tough conditions, they have this real sense of pride.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
they're part of this like ancient tradition.
It's true. There's a real sense of craftsmanship that comes with this job.
Hmm.
Remember that part in the guide about how even the tiniest imperfection in a leaf can affect the whole cigar?
Yeah, like those, what were they called? Green spots. Apparently that means that tobacco wasn't ripe enough.
Right. Green spots, tight
Huh.
grain, all those things can mess up the burn, the flavor, everything.
And a good leaf sorter can just like spot those instantly.
They're like human x-ray machines. It's incredible.
Wow. So they're not just guardians of the leaves, they're like guardians of good taste, too.
Exactly.
Speaking of taste, though, we haven't even gotten into the actual like flavor profiles of tobacco. This cigar aficionado article goes deep on how different wrapper leaves like Connecticut Shade, Habano, Maduro totally change the smoking
Oh,
experience.
yeah, that's a whole other level. And
Yeah.
each one of those wrappers needs a specific kind of leaf with its own characteristics that the sorter needs to know.
Seriously, how do they even keep it all straight?
Years of experience, I guess. It's amazing.
I'm starting to see why those interview questions are so intense. This isn't just about sorting, it's about like understanding the whole art and science of tobacco.
Right. It's this wild mix of like sensory skills, scientific knowledge, and tradition.
Okay, I'm totally geeking out over here. But just to be real for a sec, the RoleCatcher guide does mention some of the downsides too. Like, it can be physically demanding, right? Lots of repetitive motions, potential for long hours, especially during harvest season.
Definitely something to keep in mind. It's not always easy, that's for sure.
And the pay, at least starting out, it can be pretty low, according to this guide.
Yeah, that's true. But it also stresses that there's room for growth, especially if you're willing to put in the work.
Okay, that makes sense. You work your way up, learn the ropes, maybe specialize in a certain type of leaf or something.
And remember those transferable skills we talked about. Even if you don't stay in leaf sorting forever, the things you learn, they can be applied to all sorts of other jobs.
True. Like what? I'm curious now.
Well, think about it. You've got this crazy attention to detail now, right? You can spot an inconsistency from a mile away, and you understand the whole production process from start to finish. Those are valuable skills in any field where quality control matters.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. So it's like those first few years as a leaf sorter are almost like an apprenticeship. You're building up this whole skill set, this knowledge base that you can then use in different ways.
Exactly. It's a stepping stone, not a dead end. And hey, you never know. Maybe you work your way up in the company, become a master blender, or even open your own cigar lounge one day.
Okay, now that's a dream job. But before we go full entrepreneurs, let's talk about actually landing that first leaf sorter gig. This RoleCatcher guide had some interesting advice about like showcasing your skills, even creating a portfolio.
I know, right? A portfolio for leaf sorting.
It
Sounds kind of extra, but when you think about it,
kind of makes sense.
right. Imagine you can actually show a potential employer your work, different grades of tobacco you've sorted, notes on their characteristics, maybe even some sketches of different leaf shapes.
It's like a visual representation of everything we've been talking about.
Exactly. It's how you prove you're not just saying you understand tobacco, you actually live it.
Love it. So, besides the portfolio, any other hot tips for acing that interview?
Well, the guide had a whole section on answering those tough interview questions, the ones about problem solving, decision making, all that.
Right, those ones.
And they suggested having a few, like, anecdotes ready to go. Like a time you identified a super tricky tobacco defect, or when you had to work under pressure, get a huge order out on time.
So it's all about showing, not just telling.
Exactly. And honestly, I think enthusiasm goes a long way too. Employers want someone who's genuinely passionate about this world.
I think it's safe to say that leaf sorting is not what I thought it was. This is a skilled trade with history, science, and a whole lot of heart.
Couldn't agree more. It's like a hidden gem of a career path.
It really is. So for our listener who's now thinking, wait, maybe this is for me, what's the one thing you hope they take away from all this?
I'd say don't be afraid to dig a little deeper. What seems like an ordinary job on the surface could actually be a doorway to a whole world of, like, fascinating knowledge and unexpected opportunities.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What other hidden gem careers are out there? What jobs have we overlooked just waiting to be explored? Until next time, keep those minds curious.